So hi guys, my name is Nicole Sinde and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I've brought two of my fellow scholars here. I mentioned to you guys that I am a part of the first cohort of the McCall MacBain Scholars. If you guys have watched that video, I'll link it up here. And here are two other people that are also part of the scholars, and they're going to be introducing themselves. And in this video, we're just going to be talking a little bit more about the McCall MacBain Scholarship application, how you can prepare, tips, advice, all that kind of stuff. So let's start off with Grace. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Nicole, for having this, for having us, and for organizing this. Hopefully, this video will be useful for a bunch of folks. So yeah, I'm Grace. I am from Winnipeg, and I did my undergraduate at the University of Toronto, the St. George campus.
Guys, Grace has a YouTube channel and I just had to plug it because I just think it's everything. I'm not really sure if this is the reason behind her name, but it's called Mind Art, and she really is into poetry and she's taking the time out of her day to give us her knowledge. So I'd love if you guys would go subscribe and all that jazz.
And I did a double major in English literature and environmental science. And sort of for my main extracurriculars, I did work with an environmental action, environmental justice group, and I also edited with literary arts reviews, mainly the Trini Review at U of T. And now I am starting law school here at McGill. We just had our first day of orientation, so I can truly say I've started law school.
That's amazing. Also, congratulations on your first day. I saw the little photo op. It looked really cool, cute. Okay, so now Nathan.
Thanks so much for hosting this, Nicole. My name is Nathan Duarte. I'm from Milton, Ontario. I did my undergrad at the University of Waterloo, where I studied biomedical engineering. Most of my experiences were through various different internships in research or in engineering or in consulting. And I also did two extracurriculars in particular. One was helping run a conference focused on biotechnology, and one was focusing on COVID public health response. Now I'm doing a master's in electrical engineering at McGill. Unlike Grace, my classes haven't started yet, but I'm excited for them to. Looking forward to it in 2 days.
Yes, okay. And I guess I should probably introduce myself as well. Not me muting myself mid-speaking. Okay. My name is Nicole Sinde, and I studied computer science, biomedical computing at Queen's University. And my classes haven't started yet, but I'm going to be entering my Master's of Engineering through the Biological and Biomedical Engineering Department. And it is a thesis-based master's, and I'm really excited. I start on Wednesday. And I think, Nathan, we're taking one course together? Yeah.
I'll see you early in the morning on Wednesday.
I might be dropping out of it though. I'm not sure yet. But yeah, okay. So how this is gonna work is we're gonna be sharing the screen. So even though there's only three of us here, we have gotten some responses from other McCall MacBain scholars. So we're gonna be going through those, reflecting on those, giving some advice. We're gonna go through the application process, then the interview process, some tips about finding a supervisor if that is applicable to you, and then some general advice. Do you guys want to just maybe look through these and then pick out any ones that might seem interesting to you? And obviously,
Yeah, sure.
they can read them themselves as well, since we're sharing the screen. Okay, so I think it's pretty interesting. So it says, in your application and interviews, try to look for opportunities to indicate areas outside of your direct field of study in which you want to develop/grow. This indicates to them how good fit for their program and how they can support you in developing these skills and connect you with the right mentors and advisors. Okay, so I totally butchered that, but do you guys want to give your feedback on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good, right? When you're writing this application process, it's not just about what you've done previously, which obviously is a huge part and necessary and very important, but also sort of your aspirations and how you would like to grow post sort of graduation or as you go into grad school. So I think that's a great tip, sort of things that might be related to what you've done, but you're like interested in branching out more. And I think it shows like that it would show as an applicant that you do have these like aspirations that are, well, hopefully authentic, and like you're seeing like beyond what you've done and you're willing to expand.
Yeah, 1000% agree. And like one way that I did this on my application was talking about things that were not really academic at all. So I mentioned on my application that I want to start a YouTube channel. And I said that in my interview as well. And I said that actually at my regional interviews. And then at my final interviews, they were like, oh, by the way, we noticed that you started your YouTube channel. So they do like, it was crazy. Not only did they know that I started the YouTube channel, they actually watched the very first video that I posted and made notes on it. So like they were asking me about questions about like that. So they definitely do care about you as a person. So the non-academic stuff I feel like has equal merit as anything else. So yeah, if there are fun hobbies or things that you're passionate about that are not in any way related or maybe academic at all, so then I would put that as well because I gave it a shot. I think there was a part of the application where it says, is there anything that you haven't mentioned or haven't had the chance to expand on? I think it's the very last question, and that's where I put it in my application. So
yeah, and I want to like tie this into like another tip that I'm seeing. It's the third one. It's like give yourself time to fill out the application and be authentic. Take time to reflect, whether it's journaling or talking to others, treat it as an exercise of self-reflection as opposed to an application. And I think that's also like a really valuable way of seeing the application because it is like truly self-reflective. Like you're writing short essays, longer essays, like point form things. And I didn't do the strategy of like talking to those, but I feel like this is something I would love to do something later where it's like sometimes like, especially when you're applying to grad schools and scholarships, you're probably applying to so many different things and like it's a really overwhelming time. So I feel like talking to those who like love you and who know you well and they help like, see like your fundamentals and help ground you. So if you are like, struggling with like self-reflection, I feel like reaching out to people you trust is always a good idea.
I would say that the third point really resonates with me in particular for the interview process, but I think it could also be super helpful for your writing. I think in general, like having folks who you can have critical discussions with, wherein you can tell them kind of, here's what I'm thinking around how my experiences shaped me, like where I want to take the next couple of steps in my life and what my vision is for the future. And you have those folks kind of come back at you with questions like, okay, like why do you want to do this? Or like how exactly did that shape you? And kind of just like probing what you think in a very conversation-like manner, I think is a lot of prep because it's not so much about building responses or practice for interview questions, but more so it's kind of just getting practice having a conversation about yourself in a critical way, which most people I feel don't do. But that's kind of how the interviews go. And I think those things can trickle into the application process. So like into the actual writing. So probably better to start that earlier than right before the interview.
absolutely. There was one thing you said that I really just resonated with. And you were talking about like, the application process, like kind of just like being a base or foundation for conversation in your interview. That is like 1000%. Like, I remember like the information session right before the regional interviews, when a lot of us were asking us like, how do we prepare for the regional interviews? They said that it's not really, an interview process that you can really, prepare for. Like, it's not, they're not going to ask you questions like they would ask you questions in your like if you were to get a job, strengths and weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. It's really just all about you. So I feel like, the more you put like, and the more authentic it is to you in your application, the more like fruitful your interview process will be because they're taking things from a mixture of your application, so your references, the things that you put in, all that, and they're curating like an interview that's like specific to you. So the more you put and the more you give into your application, the more you'll get out of your interview process. And I would say also a little tip would be to maybe keep your own copy of the scholarship applications or your answers for each of the questions to prepare for your interview should you get into the regionals. Because there was one thing I remember in my regional interviews was some of the things that I put were like dated back to like my first year. And I don't know if y'all have amnesia at any point, but there's some things in my first years that I just be forgetting. So I did wish that I had kind of like went back and really thought about some of those answers that I put that so I could really give it my all. But at the end of the day, it was fine. But yeah, I would definitely say like keep your own copy of all your answers for your application so that if you get into your regional interviews, you can really like hone in on those things and really practice. That's the best way to practice is through your application.
I think it's like one thing that sticks out to me as a general theme is the notion of like telling a cohesive story. One of the biggest challenges in the actual application process is tying together sort of everything you've done in one singular narrative, which is hard for a lot of people. It was especially hard for me because I personally treated my undergrad as sort of a time to try a lot of different things that weren't necessarily related to each other in an obvious fashion. But when I reflect on it, the thing that did tie them together was the fact that like I was the one doing them and that I was doing them for particular reasons. So it wasn't so much a matter of like, let me create a story around, XYZ experiences that makes it seem like I'm a master planner or something. It's more so kind of looking back and saying, okay, I did switch from like experience A to experience B, but why did I make that switch? So I think it's really a matter of looking back as opposed to like creating new narratives when you're trying to synthesize everything to tell a cohesive story.
That is really well said, Nathan. Don't really have much to add, I guess. I think that's like a really great way of seeing it because I can definitely relate to you in the sense that obviously like when you're living through life, like you're not sort of being aware of like what story you're writing, you're kind of just living and doing like as your intuition and as your desires sort of like build. So it is interesting, this idea of narrative. And I think like we kind of have to be like gentle and kind to ourselves because there's no way you can write a full and cohesive narrative in 650 words or 1,000 words or 2,000. Like there's no amount of words, right? So it's about being also, I feel like it's about being realistic with like being authentic, but also realizing that you only have a short amount. So if you leave out things, like that's also okay. Like you're gonna have to leave out things. You're gonna have to emphasize certain things, and I think that will reflect on like what you care about and what you believe in. So I would say that don't think that your narrative is not genuine if you have to like leave out certain things because you only have a limited amount of words.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably where most people struggle with, at least from the people that have come to me, is like, okay, like I can only say it in this short essay. And I think like that idea of being selective is very important. You do have to be selective because there's no way that you're 20 something, 30 something, however old you are, can really condensed into that really short of a a space. So yeah, just being selective, but also again thinking about the story. I do think that no matter how you select things to put in, there will be a storyline because it's your life, and just figuring out how to like present that is probably where you will like stand out. And then maybe another tip that I would give is like that I did was I wrote all the things that I did. So I had to really think about it, like what have I done that depending on what part of the application I was at, like what can I do, what can I fill in this with. I put that on a separate application. And then I said, okay, which of these am I the most passionate about? Those are the things that I want to talk about. Because like Nathan said, there are some things that I just did for pastime or because I wanted to try it, or maybe my friend was doing it or all that kind of stuff. Like, is that really noteworthy in the sense of just like trying to like package something that someone's going to read and be impressed by as well. And I think that people will be impressed with the thing that makes you the most passionate, because that passion reads through in the paper. That's what they're going to get from it. So I think that's the most important, no matter how you go about it.
One thing I would just add is also when it seems hard to like fit things in, I would just say you can also remember that you have like referees that can talk about things. So like, for example, if you did a particular activity that you think you won't have space to talk about, one of your referees is from there, you can ask them to make like X, Y, Z points that you can't make in your own application due to space. So just remember that.
Amen. I love that.
What I love about like writing about yourself, if you're open-minded to it and you're committed to being as authentic as you can be, you'll realize that like you can't fight your own writing. If if you're trying to write something like that and that you know is like not as authentic, like chances are the writing won't feel as good or be as fluid. So I feel like I was sometimes like even surprised by my writing, because like some parts of the application, what I wrote, it like really flowed. I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that. And then some parts I felt like the words were like really like straining. And that made me also realize something about myself. So I feel like it's such a also awesome process, because it's almost like kind of transcendental, where it like, you know, the writing at some point will like, it will reveal itself, you know. And yeah, I mean, that if you don't have a transcendental experience with your application process, totally okay. But it's a cool process, like even just for like personal like reflection and development.
1000% agree. And on that point of like fluidity as well, I'm someone who struggles with writing about myself, because you always I struggle with perfection. I would say, like, try to make it the most perfect right in the beginning. I would just say in general, write, and then you can always edit after, and that's for anything. It doesn't have to even be a scholarship application. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just write it out as it is, and then afterwards you can sort of like, you know, go back and make it cute and package it well. You'll save a lot of time. I know there was one part of the application that I spent way too much time on, because I was trying to get it like right from the you know, from the jump. It's not necessary. Yeah.
Nicole, I just want to like echo that, because that's completely correct. Like the barrier to kind of what you start writing and where you end up is yourself. Like, you're the only one that's saying, oh, it's not good enough and stuff. But the application committee doesn't know you. It's about what you want to tell them. So
Exactly.
Don't put so much pressure on yourself.
Exactly. 1000%. Someone says, I would encourage applicants not to leave it to the last minute and focus on their personal statements. I would say, like, do not do what I did. I was one of those people that it wasn't like I left it to last minute, but I just had so much self-doubt about myself as a candidate that it took my mom really like bullying me to actually like put in my application. And if that's you, as long as you get the application in by the deadline, do not doubt yourself. Like, at the end of the day, I handed mine in 4 minutes before the due date and I still got here. I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm just saying that if you find yourself in a situation where you only get the confidence to apply 1 week before, that is fine. Like, at the end of the day, just still do it. But also, if you've seen it 3 weeks before, start the 3 weeks before. Don't, because I saw it actually in April. So yeah, I'm giving too much information now, but my point is like, everybody's journey is like different, and there might be other reasons beyond procrastination to why it might get left to the last minute. And if that's the case, don't feel too bad. Just get it done and hand it in.
Just like on that point about references, I think there's a lot of opportunity to make things really easy for your references. So like, I mean, for this scholarship in particular, but more generally, like the grad school application process, I found that my referees really appreciated when I sort of gave them a couple of things that were top of mind for me applying. So that includes my resume, what I want to talk about in my personal statement, and also things that I generally like hoped they would mention, or like kind of jogging their memory around specific experiences I had with them. In general, the feedback I received in doing that was that it's super helpful, because they're probably writing references for like 10 other people as well. So as much as you can help them, all the better to you, and the stronger the reference will be for you.
Yes, and another thing as well is, if you're someone that doesn't have maybe the best established rapport with professors or someone or connections or someone that can write a reference for you, do not be afraid to reach out to someone that you haven't like known for too long as well, because they might still be able to write you a good reference. And also, it doesn't also have to be someone within academia as well, like within the institution that you're in. So I know that I've done some research that wasn't through Queen's University, that wasn't even through a university at all, but it was academic, so through like organizations and that kind of stuff. So if you're someone who has invested more time into like, extracurriculars that are like outside of academics, those can also be references. I guess what I'm saying is just like be creative with your references. If you find that you're not able to just be like, have a reference like right out of your pocket or something like that. And also, if you're starting your application really, really early, I think like usually the application, the what do you call it? The what's those things that Julia hosts? The information sessions usually start like in April or May or June, something like that. And it's not usually due till September. That's enough time to establish a relationship with someone that can write you a reference. So, make friends with a professor in April and then ask them to be your reference in like June. That's enough. I'm saying get crafty.
Just I really appreciate this discussion. And yeah, like speaking about like this idea of like confidence and like sort of you being like your biggest barrier to submitting. I remember that like the time that I submitted, which I guess was like September 2020, I was like honestly like in a really like not a great mental mindset, and I honestly like wasn't thinking so much about the future. I was just in a really low mood due to like different personal reasons. And so in a lot of ways, like I felt like almost like no sort of motivation or feeling like not compelled to apply to anything, right? But thankfully I had like my parents and sort of that sort of past like motivation, I guess, I try to muster up, and I'm like in a completely different mental headspace now. So just because like even if you're not like feeling in like the best headspace now, you still have like that sort of spark or this sort of motivation at the back of your mind to apply, or this like low-key confidence, like just go for it, right? You don't know where you're going to be in a year. And this scholarship is one of the most like wonderful things that have happened to me, and I feel really, really grateful and privileged to be here. But me a year ago like wasn't thinking in that way, and like almost didn't want to apply to any grad schools. So
I love that. Yeah, for sure. Self-confidence is key as well, but sometimes we're not always 100% there, and that's fine. Let's move on to the interview process. I feel like we've kind of talked about it, intertwined it with the application process, which is, given. But now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. So essentially how the interview process works, you have your regional interviews and you have your final interviews. So in our year, I think there was about 800 applicants, something like that. And the first email that comes out tells you if you have been accepted as a regional finalist. And I think it was 150 of us that went to the regional interviews. And how that works, there are 3 interviews. It's a full day thing, I would say, like 5 hours. Is that a full day? No, it's not really, but so 5 hours you have to, for your interviews. The first interview is like 20 minutes, second interview is also 20 minutes, and the third interview is also like 15 minutes, something like that. You have 2 sets of interviewers for the first interview, another set of interviews for the second interview, and then all 4 of your interviewers come together for the third and final interview. The first one is more like lighthearted. The second one kind of gets more into the nitty gritty. And then the third one is kind of just like a summary, wrapping up anything that you might have not been able to really expand on in your first and second interview. And that kind of like model is the same throughout the regional interviews and the final interviews. And while you're waiting for your interview, you have like a group that you're with for that day that are also being interviewed, and you get to meet with alumni, other scholarship recipients from the foundation and the other scholarships that they are affiliated with. And throughout the entire process of the interview, so when I say the interviews, I mean not just the days that you're interviewing, but like the the weeks leading up to it, we have like different Zoom meetings and stuff like that. You get to meet with professors, the dean, literally everybody. So I would say, like, if anything, apply for those connections, because I've still made friends and connections through the process. And then after the regional interviews, it goes from 150 to 50 students, and then from 50 to the 20. And that's how it was for our year. I don't know if anything's going to change this year, because I reckon that there's probably more people now. But yeah, that's just a little overview of how it was for our year. Now the table's off to you guys.
What stands out from these first few answers is the part where it says the interviews can ask some pretty brutal questions. And I like to use the word brutal, but it is true. Like, they can ask like pointed questions, and keep in mind, like, these interviewers are like really up and coming people in Canada. So I remember in my final interviews, I remember this one woman who I felt like was like definitely really probing me and could probably smell any bullshit if I said anything. And then later on, like, I was speaking with one of the finalists like in my group, and they said that they recognized her as like a CBC reporter. So I was like, oh my God, that makes a lot of sense. So you'll have like different like public servants, like people in like private companies, like leaders across Canada. So these are like really bright people, and it made the interviews fun, but also like definitely challenging. Like, I remember this like specific question where they asked like, oh, like, how do you like to lead, or something like that, and I sort of answered just using like three words, that like three adjectives, and I was like, okay, that's the end of it. And then the next question was, give an example of each of those adjectives. So it's like you really have to think on the spot. But again, they're not trying to corner you. They just like really want to see like your intuition and your values come out. So there can be challenging questions, but it's like kind of to help make you shine, kind of. So I liked it. I liked the interview process and meeting everyone. Nathan and I were in the same regional interviews. So
Nathan was in my final interviews.
Wow, we all have a connection.
Yeah. That idea of like thinking on the spot. I'm someone who has learned that to just ask for more time. So I'll literally just be like, can I think about that for a second? And I'll just gather myself. I'll think about it, and then I'll answer. And I would say that in any given interview, I probably do that at least twice, because first of all, I stutter and I'm very self-conscious about that. But also, I'm not someone that can like really give a well thought out answer unless I really think about it. So if you're like that as well, they were very receptive to me asking, can I just have some time to think about it? So yeah, you can also do that if you're someone that, if you get kind of nervous trying to like think of an answer right away, it can flow. You can take some time to also like think about it as well.
Yeah, and one thing I would say, building off of what you just said, Nicole, is that if you're asked a question that's like as broad as, for example, the one that Grace said she was asked around, like, how do you lead? Obviously, that's a very complex like question with so many different things you could say. I think even saying three things is a lot, a lot of ground to cover. And what I would say when you're faced with those really broad questions is that you don't need to summarize your entire life or like even your entire approach to leadership like right there and then. You only have a couple of minutes. So maybe think of like one thing or like a small amount of things, really whatever comes to mind that is true and that you think you can stand behind, and then build off of that, because other aspects of your leadership will come out in other areas. So I would say like that's another way that personally I was able to sort of give quick and to the point responses to these really tough and like vague questions, is just recognizing like I won't get through everything. I just need to provide like an answer that makes sense and that gives them more information about me.
I would also say as well, to that last point, I remember that there was one question that really like I was doing so good, and this question kind of tripped me up. I think it was, they were asking about a conference that my club started, where we brought 200 students from the GTA to Kingston, Ontario, and then they asked about like some of the bureaucracies behind that, and I did not expect them to ask like about how we're actually able to get them, because there was a lot of and so because I didn't think about it in the moment, I was just like, wait, how do I really package this nicely? Because it was a lot of work. And they're like, we want to know, like, it couldn't have been easy, like, trying to get, minors to come here. And I really, like, instead of trying to go through all of the, like, the small finicky details, I just instead talked about the time management, the task, like things that were more like high level. I think in general, in my opinion, staying high level and then expanding on those high level things will go a lot further than trying to go really to the nitty gritty and then and trying to like dissect it. For me, like that's something that I was able to do, because I could have talked about things like, so I'm going to give an example of like high level and low level. Like, we had issues with getting forms out, getting permission from parents, but all that kind of stuff, like that really doesn't say anything about about me and how I was able to problem solve. Things that do would be something more high level, like the principals were kind of wary about bringing their students to a predominantly white and elitist institution when their students are from lower income areas. How are we able to mend that sort of like like friction kind of thing? And so I would talk about that instead. That's more high level, and that more talks about me as a problem solver and me as a mediator. And I think that you'll have a lot more success trying to talk about the high level things, and then trying to go to the small little details, and then finding yourself kind of like lost in the sauce. I definitely say try to be more concise and up here instead of down there. Ooh, someone says here, there's no really tricky questions, only about what you have done, why you have done it, and what you want to do next. That sounds pretty tricky to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt there were some challenging questions for sure.
I think
Yeah.
I know what this person is trying to say though. Like, I think they're trying to say like there's no question that asked with the intent to trick you. Like they're mostly just trying to find out about you, but some of them can come across very tricky if you haven't really thought about it a lot. And that's why I would say that keep another copy of your responses to all the questions, because that's going to be the material for your interview. And if you have that all in your mind kind of thing, I don't think you'll find any of them tricky. The only thing that you'll have maybe a thing to adjust is just how to, again, like you said, package what you want to say in a way that will be received well.
I mean, from my personal experience, I feel like there was a bit of a different dynamic. I could definitely, especially in my final round, get the sense that my interviewers were trying to like push me out of my comfort zone and create, I don't want to say like an uncomfortable environment, but they were trying to really like provide challenging questions that made me like pause right there and like come up with something on the spot. So I guess what this goes to show is that everyone's interview experience is pretty different, right? So some people could have felt comfortable with every question, but that definitely wasn't the case for me.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the final interviews. I think so. With the regional interviews, I think they allow you to sort of like float in your comfort zone and just kind of talk about your experience, like all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the final interviews, they try to take your experience and sort of like plop it in a different scenario that you maybe haven't really expanded on in your application, and see how you navigate new and uncomfortable situations. And I use that word uncomfortable very loosely, because uncomfortable doesn't always mean bad. It just means different and new, like change. And I definitely found that was like, I can agree with Nathan there. My final interviews, there were scenarios that I just like, I think they asked me one question about, okay, other than, so a lot of my work has been with equity and diversity. So they asked me a question, I don't remember exactly what it was, but just kind of along the lines of, other than equity and diversity, like, how do you see yourself being a leader? Like, how do you see yourself, manifesting as a leader? And for me, it's like a lot of my work has been through that. But then when I took probably a good like full minute thinking about this question before I answered, but I was able to talk about, my strength as a person and how that could be applied to different aspects of of leadership that there are? And that was a very uncomfortable and hard question for me to answer.
I think one thing that we didn't talk too much about that is highlighted in some of these tips is the idea that you want to show up at the interview, you know, wanting to meet everyone, wanting to have a good time, and wanting to just like have interesting discussions. I think that attitude is super critical. I think it will probably change a little bit next year as potentially things go back to in person. The dynamic was very different, like over Zoom, like during COVID. But in general, had some fantastic discussions, as each of you know, in each of our like interview rounds. And I think that really, I don't want to say that those were evaluative sessions, but they definitely sort of set the stage for the actual interviews themselves. So if it makes a world of a difference going into a room with two interviewers if you come from a discussion with four people or three other people in the same boat as you, and you've been having a really cool discussion, because your mind's just like the gears in your mind are turning. You're thinking about things. So treat all aspects of kind of the interview day or the interview kind of session as important and something you really want to grow from and have a good time during.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nathan. And I think to like add on it and not contradicting it, but sort of like adding my nuance is that it's also okay, like if you don't feel 100% comfortable, if you're not completely having fun, like it is an interview for scholarship at the end of the day. It's nerve-wracking. You are competing for something. So it's not gonna ever be like just hanging out with friends, right? Like there's always an awareness that these people are in one sense like they can be peers, but they're also like competitors, and that's something that's like it would be false to like assume otherwise. So I would just say like try your best to be comfortable, because like Nathan says, it does help your interview process, and it will help you gain some more meaningful like thoughts after and like experiences after the interview. But it's also like, I mean, it's totally normal. Like if it does feel nerve-wracking or it feels like inauthentic sometimes, like I think that's at the end nature of like these more competitive interviews. So I think you can like have both, and it's about like kind of juggling both.
I definitely was with that person that started off super high energy, like went into my first interview like laughing and giggling. But by the time my third interview came, like I was so burned out. I felt like I have a social battery that's very like this. And so by the time the third interviews came, like I was ready to just get that interview like and go, but I was really trying to keep a smiley face. And so a lot of water, hydrate yourself. You know, my mom, bless her, because it was a Zoom, because it was a Zoom interview process, like she would come to my door and give me water, like water. But if it's in person, that might be a little bit harder to do. So maybe pack some snacks and whatever. And also like feel free to like take some like time off away from the group if it is in person, or you know, turn your camera off just to like have some regroup time. I think regroup time is very important because after a while, like the chat and like the constant chatter and just keeping a smile on your face for that long, like I found that my resting face, like normally my resting face is kind of like, you know, but I was very aware to keep my resting face as like, you know, and that got so tiring after a while. I was just like, Jesus Christ, you know. So yeah, I definitely can take off from both parts of what you're saying. It's like, okay, if you're not always super high energy and super social, but you know, try your best if you can to, you know, feed off the energy of other people. My first interview, I'm telling you, I feel like that very first interview at my regionals really set me just, you know, because I feel like I killed that one. And it was because of like just seeing people come back from their interview and just us talking and chatting. It definitely helped me get the momentum that I needed to like drive the day. This is super important. Everybody's excited and as nervous as you are. Yes. Also, I would say don't read other people's bios, because it just makes you feel like crap. I read everybody's bios. By the time I got to final interviews, I was just like, damn, I'm not getting it. I was just like, this is not gonna happen. I was like, when they told me that I got in, I was very skeptical to tell anybody else, because I thought maybe they'd come back and be like, sorry, it was the other Nicole, or it was somebody else, because that when I looked at other people's bios, that I had scared myself out of the win, you know? So I would say if you're a person that gets easily spooked by other people's, you know, greatness or whatever it is, then don't psych yourself out by reading other people's bios. If that is not applicable to you, then knock yourself out.
I just wanted to highlight, I think it's a little bit on the top. It says like French speakers, for French speaking candidates, they don't care as much of your English level. Like I think most of us here in the scholarship, like English is our most comfortable language, but like, yeah, there are plenty of like French candidates, and, you know, just wanted to highlight this one and say that I like this comment, and that I think interviewers are very understanding of your personal context, whether that be your language or your culture or your like education history or your like career history, right? So just bring your best foot forward, and like know that like if you are selected for interviews, like you're here for a reason. So and just like trust, like partly trust that the interviewers are trying to understand you and to reach you, so you don't have to do all the work of like trying to reach the interviewer. But yeah, like shout out to like all French candidates applying.
Yeah. And then here, just like this one, I feel like also should be highlighted. We don't have to really go into it too much, but yeah, like anecdotal experiences, like, you know, I think that goes a long way, and it really just does drive the conversation. And again, you're giving them material, so definitely can resonate with this one. And there was another one. Oh, someone says don't answer any questions with I don't know. Yeah, I think that's like, I'd rather you say, can I have some more time to think, than say like I don't know, because it comes across as a lazy answer, you know, if you're, because I don't know basically says please move on to the next.
I would just double down on the point right before the I don't know, which is tell stories. Stories are like the bread and butter of these interviews. They, like any question will either be more of like a philosophical one or like a reflection based question where it's like, tell me about some attribute of yourself, or like what you like or what you do, or, you know, something on a higher level. Or it will be something along the lines of like, okay, tell me about when that actually happened. And to give you like an example of how important like stories are, I was asked one question around like instances in which I'd gone out of my way to listen to the needs of an underrepresented group. And I provided one story, and then they said, can you provide another one? So I provided another one, and then they said, can you provide another one? So there's 3 stories, and it's not so much like a exercise of building up a repertoire of stories, but it's more so that there are just some types of experiences based on your own profile and what you talk about, where the interviewers will really want to explore like how you've done what you say you've done. So it's not even necessarily that one is insufficient based on what they were asking. Maybe they just want to see all the angles in which you've done something that you say you're really passionate about. So keep that in mind.
And also to build on that as well, I remember having a similar situation, and I didn't have another story to tell, but the idea of like angles and how you tell a story is very important. You can tell things from different perspectives, and from hindsight, from foresight, from all those kinds of things. So I remember for one of them where when they asked me to give them another example, I said, okay, well, going back to that story, like, you know, prior to this event happening or prior to this happening, here's how I saw it, here's how I felt it, here's how I see it now. So if you like, you never want to make up a story, because that draws away from the idea of authenticity. So, but you also want to be creative. So if you only have that one story, then it's like, how can you tell that story from different angles? Angles are very, very important. And as long as you're able to show them a different side of you, that is another story that's manifesting. So I definitely feel like that's very important to think about as well. It's not about how many stories, it's about how you tell the stories. It's always about how you tell the story.
Talking about these interviews honestly makes me glad that we've completed it, because it is not easy, and it is definitely a challenge and like a sigh of relief when you're done. And I think the great part of the McCall MacBain interviews is that you have 3 for both like regionals and finals. And I remember like Natasha, who's the dean of the scholarships, like telling us during information sessions, like one of the reasons why they do this is that, like, let's say you don't perform or you don't think you performed as well in one interview, you still have like other chances to like really bring yourself forward. So like even if you have like one bad interview, that doesn't spell out a certain result. So just hopefully that's like a reassurance. And yeah, I personally really enjoyed that sort of format, even though like we were talking about earlier, it definitely gets a little tiring at the end. So yeah, please feel free to like take breaks. I know that when there were like designated break times, I always like took the full time, muted and the camera and microphone. I was like, just like went on a walk or ate a banana, you know. It might be different if they're in person, which I'm sure you'll get a moment to like go into your own room or go outside and like take a breath of fresh air. So just do what will be best for you to do well during interviews.
I remember for my final interviews, I felt that my second interview wasn't as good as my first interview. But what's really good is that you're interviewed by 2 separate sets of people. So the first 2 interviewers are different from the second set of interviewers. So regardless, you still get that very last interview to really make an impression on all of them together. So if you felt like the first one you wasn't really good, you have another chance to like impress them again, and you felt like the second one wasn't good, then you also have the first one to fall back on, but also another time to really impress them as well. So and I'm gonna say this as well, and I don't know if you guys would agree, but I definitely feel like in all of your interviews, like in your interviews, like there'll be that one person that in your interview that favors you the most. And I don't mean like in comparison to other candidates. I mean like you'll have a certain affinity for someone in your interview. For me, there was definitely a lady that I felt like, you know, she was making eye contact with me. I was making contact with her and I was talking to her. So I would say that find that person that you feel like the most find that interviewer that you feel like is the conversation is flowing the most with, and look at them, and I feel like it will make it more comfortable. That sounds really weird to say, and it might have no like actual like, you know, factual basis, but I definitely think that if you believe it, that's what matters. And for me, I believe that, like, you know, there was that one interviewer that had like that I was vibing with, to per se, and that's kind of like where I kept my energy looking. So like even if I was getting in my head about like how I was answering the question, she was always smiling, you know. And some of the other interviewers were a little bit more stern and or had like very poker faces, but that one interviewer, no matter how I thought about it in my head, she was always smiling. So I said, okay, I'm gonna feed off of her energy. So if you can find someone in your interviewer set that makes you feel the most comfortable or the most confident, then I would say, like, you know, try and direct your eyes to that person, because I feel like it definitely will help kind of like redeem your confidence. A little weird tip, but it worked for me. Yeah.
I have a question, Nicole. If this was like an in-person interview, would you still recommend though to like just keep eye contact to that one person?
Absolutely not. No, because in a Zoom they can't tell where your eyes is, like, because you don't know where like the camera is. So like you don't even know if that person actually knows you're looking at them.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's different. I would say that in an in-person interview, because I have done in-person interviews, you kind of want to like make sure you're looking at both of them, but also remember that like it's only 2 interviews, that like 2 people are interviewing you for the first and second one. So naturally you're going to probably be looking at one person more, but that's fine. But don't like only look at that person. I would say if it's online, I think that is more, that advice is more applicable. If it's in person, then maybe just feed off their energy, but don't do the step of only looking at them, because that could also play to your downfall, where it's like you're not giving enough eye contact with all the interviewers. But I definitely think that feeding off the energy of someone that you feel like kind of keeps you here when you might be kind of getting in your head is good, whether it's in person or online.
I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, because I think, at least for me personally, I'm sure like others, one tends often we tend to gravitate towards the negative. Like for me, I feel like I often notice whoever is not really feeling me, or we're not really vibing, and you start manifesting like that sort of more like bad energy. So I think that's a great idea, because you might not have like somebody who you at least think is not really feeling it, or you feel like is like asking you just like more, not like ill attended, but just you're just not like completely vibing. So I think it's a great idea to try to connect with whom you do think might be supporting you. And overall though, I would just say try not to take anything personally, right? Like we don't know how they're thinking. I mean, as well, like I remember, like in the scholarship sessions, they were always saying how like these interviewers are also nervous. Like some of them are also like very nervous interviewing. So, we also have to like empathize with their situation. So just because they might be giving you a poker face doesn't definitely not mean that they're not supportive.
Okay, so we'll spend a little bit of time here just because I know that not everybody will be doing a thesis-based master's or a master's at all. So if you're like a JD student or a medical student, this might not apply. Nathan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, the idea around doing your due diligence basically is repeated a lot, and I would stress that. I would say operate under the assumption, even though you find out about the scholarship a couple of months after you apply and go through the process, operate under the assumption that that you will get it, and that you should be setting yourself up for success. Because if you do get it and then you haven't done the due diligence, then you'll be in a tricky spot, because you won't have gotten the information you need to confirm that you've got a solid path ahead, like which professors you might do research with, what exactly you might want to focus on, and I think in general, doing that due diligence up front, and kind of putting yourself in the shoes of someone who has the scholarship and who's going through the program at McGill has the added benefit of helping you during your interviews, because people will ask you, your interviews will ask you, what do you want to do at McGill? Like, what do you want to research? Like, why? And if you've already done the thinking, because you need to do the thinking, then that will help you come up with your answers. So yeah, do the due diligence, talk to profs, talk to their students, and do that all as early as you can.
I would also say, for me, what I did was in terms of like finding research, I wanted to like read about what they did to know that if I had any interest in their research. So a lot of them will have published papers, Google Scholar, PubMed, look through those. In particular, you want to find research papers in which they are like the first, second, or third author on the paper, because the farther down they are on the author list is the less contributions they've had to it. So maybe I know like one of my professors was published on a paper where they just used her code, but she didn't really have any contributions to the actual research itself. So you want to find research where like the first or second or maybe third listed author, and like really read on it as well. Because for me, when I was trying to find a program advisor or a supervisor here at McGill, I was having trouble, getting responses like emails back. And I think it was because I was coming across as someone who was just kind of like easily weeded out, because I wasn't really saying like, this is why I want to work with you, and here's here's what I'm interested in. So once I kind of like changed my approach and I said, hi, my name is this, I'm applying to this program and I'm really interested in working part of your lab and contributing in this way. I actually got like in 1 week, like 3 more professors actually that I had already emailed prior, respond back to me. So definitely the way you come to them is very important, because they have like a lot of students also trying to get into their labs, a lot of emails asking about, supervision, and they're only really going to pay attention to the students that kind of like give them a reason to be paid attention to. So in the beginning, I definitely wasn't doing a good job in making myself stand out. So definitely do your research like this person says, and reach out to them in a way that makes them feel flattered, I would say. And also do not be afraid to reach out to them as well. Like in the beginning, I was kind of like, I don't want to be bothering people. I don't want to be, but no, like honestly, you're better off sending like, 10 emails to 10 different professors, because they might respond back to you, but it might just be like, oh, I don't have funding, or oh, this, or oh, my lab is this. I got a lot of no's before I got a yes. So I definitely think that, this idea of casting a wide net definitely plays in your best interest, in terms of like finding a supervisor. And don't be bummed out if you don't get a supervisor right away. If you start early, and by early I mean like September, start preparing, like looking at preparing your emails and that kind of thing. By the time the scholarship comes, and like Nathan said, acting in that assumption that you've already gotten the scholarship, you will find a professor or a supervisor that will want you, and the scholarship will also help you with that as well. I know that at some point there were some students that didn't have a supervisor yet, and so what they did, and by they I mean the scholarship team here, was they connected you to professors that they knew that might have openings, or that might know someone that have openings, or that they're in liaison with. That was very helpful as well. So my last thing I would say about this is that don't settle as well. You don't have to, like, for the purpose of just, trying to find a supervisor, settle for research that you do not want to do. Because at the end of the day, you're investing time. You're basically an employee of the university. University is like half teaching students and then half research. And if you're doing a thesis-based master's, then you're part of like the research team, which means you are, I think of it as an employee of the university, because your research could be groundbreaking. You could bring a lot of like buzz to the university should your research, have that kind of impact. And in that case, you want to be passionate about your research. So if you find a professor and you're maybe not vibing, they want you, but you're not vibing with their research, or they're trying to like force you to just be a part of research that you're not interested in, then keep your options open. I wouldn't say just, completely take it off the table, but keep it open as well. And don't be afraid to tell them more what you're interested in, and tell them what you're not interested in as well.
I'd only add one small thing, which is sometimes, and this is the position I'm currently in, you won't find one specific professor that does kind of exactly what you want to do. And that's true at any given university. No university has everything. And in those cases, I think you can really rely on the fact that you would be bringing funding yourself if you received a scholarship, and you can, instead of optimizing for a particular prof that does exactly what you want to do, instead look for profs that you think would be just good mentors in general, who are willing to support you, who are willing to point you in the right directions, make the right introductions, because fundamentally that's kind of what you need first and foremost out of a research prof. And then the next layer of things, which is like technical expertise in the area, equipment if you're doing that type of research, connections to industry if you're interested in that. Those things can come after through introductions and through partnerships. But first and foremost, I would say like find someone who can be a great mentor for you.
I also found myself in that situation. And so I found out through other people that you could actually have like co-supervisors. That's another thing. So if there's two professors that have like, different sides of research that you think that, can work together, that's also an avenue. But then also some supervisors are not open to the idea of co-supervision. But also I learned that as well, you have your main thesis project, but you can also kind of like jump in on other research projects as well and be like a minor contributor to other things as well. So for me, it was really important not to lose like my computer science background now that I'm kind of like becoming an engineer. So I'll be jumping in and doing some machine learning for a completely different, research project that has nothing to do with mine. And that was how I was able to kind of like balance, this idea of like getting into this new program, but also wanting to kind of like stay true to like my undergraduate degree and that kind of thing. And then also realizing as well that I know I said that you don't want to settle as well, But it's not settling if you don't 100% like it. I don't think I don't think that in the beginning you're gonna find like 100% like a content feeling with it, because it's very new, like, you know. But you want to at least like the overview of what you're doing, like that, like what you're researching itself, like, you know. And then also another thing I think is really important when you're finding your supervisor is just rapport on just a basic level. Besides the academic, besides all that other stuff, just, do you get along with your supervisor? I've heard a lot of stories of you know, supervisors from hell, or like supervisors you just that you weren't able to like mesh well with as well. So in the beginning, trying to find a supervisor that you're also just kind of like vibing with. I've been using that word a lot. I feel like an 8-year-old. Just finding a supervisor that you have a good rapport with is also equally as important as finding a supervisor that you like their research as well. And realizing that a master's program, if that's what you're doing, is only 2 years. But there's also different, like where you start with your master's, it won't always be where you will end. And I know this now because through the lab that I'm going to be starting in, some of the people who are there now, like the way their thesis ended, it wasn't the way it started. So that gives me hope to know that like where I'm starting now, as I get more nuance and niched and that kind of thing, that it will change and develop into something that's really truly me. And one thing that came to my mind as well is, besides finding a supervisor, just finding a program. I was someone that really didn't know if I wanted to do engineering, if I wanted to do data science. And I know they sound so different, but I was kind of like in this predicament where I just started getting into data science, and I just started really liking my biomedical computing program. I would say you can apply to both and just really spend that like last year of your undergrad or whatever you're doing. Maybe you're not even in undergrad. Just finding what you want to learn the most about, because it is a learning experience, and just keeping your options open. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to choose a program. But one thing that Natasha, the dean, really helped me sort of like think about when I was deciding, like really up until the last day when I accepted, was, you know, which one do I see myself learning the most from? Which one do I see myself expanding the most on? And that was how I ended up choosing biomedical engineering. So if you're kind of like caught in between multiple programs, you don't have to choose right away. You can keep your options open and use that period to just sort of like decipher and figure it out. Okay, so we're on to the very last part.
I appreciate a lot of these advices, can relate to a lot of them. There's one here, it's like, take all advice, including mine, with a grain of salt. Everyone's experience and journeys are different, so do what you know works best for you while being open to feedback. And I think this applies also to like this session. You know, there's like, we've been talking for around an hour, right? So it's like a lot of information, and clearly we've had like different experiences, and you will as well. So you might be somebody who really likes like getting advice, but you also might be somebody who like is really overwhelmed with advice. Like in some ways, I'm kind of glad I applied throughout the first year, because there's like no precedent, right? So there's no idea of like what the previous scholars were like, or what the application process is like. And, you know, some people like a bit of that sort of like ignorance based, not ignorance like in a bad way, but just like not knowing everything, so that you don't have to be anxious or neurotic about everything. So I think, yeah, so like kind of take this advice as you like, but also just like remember that it's like you yourself. I know I tend to like compare myself a lot, or think like, oh, they're doing this, like, and I'm not doing that. Does that mean I have like less of a chance at the scholarship? But at the end of the day, there's like so many people in this world. So if you can like live in yourself, that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo one of the points made above, which is along the lines of, if you approach this as an opportunity for growth, and you only expect that out of it, like you basically won't fail, because you'll definitely get the growth. You will definitely kind of emerge a person that's more reflective and in touch with yourself and what your strengths and weaknesses are, why you've done things, what you want to do. So I feel like that's the baseline, that like expectation that you should set for yourself, and that's achievable in just going through the application. Anything else, you know, friends you might meet, whether or not you might win this scholarship or a smaller one from the semifinals or the finals, Really anything else is an awesome bonus that you can also take away. But if you set your expectations such that it's just a growth opportunity, I think you'll emerge better and more prepared for the next steps in your career in any case.
Yeah, I think I'm all advised out, at least right now. My brain is kind of like running blank. Oh, don't like spend a whole lot of money trying to like find like something to wear. Like that's one thing I regret doing. Like I went to like it wasn't like that much money. I went to Marshalls and found like I was at that time like we didn't know if it was going to be in person or not, and I wanted to do it in person, so I had spent money on getting a top and a bottom, just for it to be in person. I mean online, but even if it was not online, like I felt like even the facilitators and the interviewers, like nobody was like so like I feel like we were more dressed up than they were. Like we were in suits and business casual, and they were just kind of like more chill. So I feel like you don't have to go out and like spend a bunch of money to like look very proper, like or put together. Like you can wear like I don't know, I don't want to say you can dress down a little bit, but I'm just saying like don't spend money on trying to look fancy. I'll stop sharing. I want to just thank you guys for being here, and I also want to thank all the other applicants that filled out this form and gave us some material to talk about. And I want to say good luck to anybody that's applying. I think applications are due on the 22nd or 24th. I'm not sure. Let me fact check that. But you still have time to get your application in. You have like 3 weeks. Do you guys know when it's due?
The 22nd, September 22nd, 2021 at 4 p.m. EST.
EST.
Do not mistake it for a midnight deadline.
Exactly. It's not a midnight deadline. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, good luck everyone. And I hope we've answered all your questions. Yeah, I always forget to do my outro. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, share, and encourage your friends to also apply. All right, now bye guys. Oh, one last thing. Can we take a picture for the thumbnail? Just smile.
Yeah.
Okay. Ah, no! That was so quick. Okay, wait. It's not working. Hold on. Okay, it's working now. All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Wow, that was like such a click.
I know. Yeah, it's the screen. Yeah, it's the Mac.